Welcome to the Autograph with me, Susan Madaris. My guest this week is author and journalist Max Blumenthal. Join us as he talks about the root causes of Islamophobia and the impact of the Zionist ideology on American politics. Max Blumenthal is known to be one of the most constantly cited young liberal journalists in America. An award-winning journalist and best-selling author, his articles, analysis, and video documentaries have appeared in many of the leading publications and networks, including The New York Times, The Nation, The Guardian, The Huffington Post, The Independent Film Channel, Salon.com, and many others. He is currently a writing fellow for the Nation Institute. For the past 8 years, Blumenthal has been covering the far right. He has interviewed hundreds of the Christian rights leaders and activists, attended dozens of its rallies and conferences, listened to countless hours of its radio programs, and sat in movement-oriented houses of worship where no journalists were permitted. I started our interview by discussing the recent congressional hearings on the radicalization of the American Islamic community put forth by House Homeland Security Committee Chairman Peter King, a Republican from New York. The very nature of the hearings have been termed by many, including Keith Ellison, a Democrat from Minnesota and the first Muslim elected to Congress, as a misguided approach that will alienate the American Islamic community as a whole and is counterproductive to improving national security. Shortly before the hearings, Blumenthal testified at a Capitol Hill briefing on Islamophobia, in which he described as the transatlantic Islamophobic axis. While Islamophobia in America and anti-Arab bigotry is widely viewed to be traced to the events of 9/11, Blumenthal argues we must look further back to fully understand these sentiments.
The campaign can go back all the way to the 1930s, the 40s. The American public was bombarded with anti-Arab Orientalist images in their popular culture through cartoons by Leon Schlesinger, the animator from Warner Brothers, that portrayed about Ali Baba, this Arab savage, or the Leon Uris novels, which were transformed into Hollywood productions like Exodus, which is this famous Otto Preminger film starring Paul Newman about the foundation of Israel. And the reason the film was made was because the American Jewish public was insufficiently sympathetic to or interested in Zionism and the establishment of the State of Israel. They just weren't very enthusiastic, so they made this film that had scenes of Jewish terrorists from the Irgun portrayed as heroic, saying, duck, there are Arabs out there, and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem collaborating with Nazis to portray the Palestinians as Nazis. So there was already a pre-existing context where Americans were cultivated to hate and demonize Arabs. And after 9/11, it turned into a full-on political campaign. But actually, through my research, I found that this campaign really started in the 90s in earnest, with a documentary called Jihad in America, which was broadcast on our public television with a self-styled terror expert who produced it named Stephen Emerson, who supplies all of the research for the Islamophobic bloggers, even lawyers in the FBI have consulted with him, and he basically claimed in this documentary that there were terror cells inside the U.S., which led to roundups and prosecutions of Muslim leaders like Sami al-Arian and the Holy Land Foundation, and all of these prosecutions have been completely discredited. I mean, these figures had no links to terror in any direct way. Yet some of them have been thrown in jail. Mm-hmm. But Emerson didn't have a catalyst for putting his for taking his campaign to a national level where people in Congress would start taking it seriously. Not until 9/11. Yet after 9/11, American attitudes towards Muslims were not affected in any direct way. They were always sort of negative. Their attitudes toward the Palestinians were very negative, but you didn't see a spike. And George W. Bush, this president who was poised to unilaterally invade Iraq and change the geopolitical atmosphere of the Middle East, condemned Islamophobia at the National Cathedral, something Barack Obama has never done. Yeah. So it really took the election of Barack Obama, whose middle name is Hussein, to take this to make this campaign into something national and much more coherent and powerful than before. And it's because it's become part of the Republican campaign to attack Obama. So by attacking Muslims, they're actually waging a political campaign that they think will have consequences in 2012. And so they see every Muslim in the United States actually as a symbol of the federal government, which is something we've never had before because of this misperception of Barack Obama as himself a Muslim. 50% of Republicans, according to a recent poll, believe Barack Obama is not an American.
Wow. And so basically these hearings, do you think, ultimately have more to do with partisan issues and upcoming presidential elections than casting an extreme net on a religious community inside the United States?
There are a lot of issues at play with these hearings. One of them is partisan politics, that Peter King, who convened the hearings, first of all, he's very close to the Israel lobby. He's been in favor of all of the American wars in the Middle East. That's established. But he's also a social moderate with a lot of moderate clergy in his district in Long Island. His district's divided into two parts. One is very conservative and one is very moderate, and he has to balance between the two. I found it interesting that he was leading these hearings, and it's really because of the power of the far right in the Republican Party. That's something that I discuss in my book, Republican Gomorrah, is how the far right just took over the Republican Party, and people like Peter King actually feel threatened by this element. And so what he's doing by calling these hearings is making himself into a hero for this movement, while he is in favor of abortion rights for women and is generally, sympathetic to gay rights, issues that the far right despises. So he can still get away with that and balance these two constituencies. Right now, Peter King is really the hero of the far right because the far right is obsessed with Muslims and believes there's a secret plot to install Sharia law in the United States. In fact, they've been passing laws in states that are heavily controlled by Republicans, like Oklahoma, to ban Sharia law, as if there is any attempt to actually make Sharia in any way affect the lives of anyone.
Yeah.
So you see this hysteria actually playing out, and it starts with cynical partisan considerations, but then it has real life consequences. Or you look at what happened in Yorba Linda, which is a conservative, faraway suburb of Los Angeles and San Diego, where some Muslims gathered at a community center to raise money for homeless Muslim women. And they were surrounded by hundreds of people that I just consider to be the modern incarnation of the Ku Klux Klan, chanting "Go home," calling them terrorists. And these are families walking by with children who had to cover their ears so they wouldn't hear this. This is how it's playing out, and I've heard from one of the imams who is involved in planning this event that the harassment has continued in supermarket parking lots in that community and in schools where Muslim families are finding their property defaced. So a lot of this isn't reported because first-generation Muslim immigrants feel intimidated by law enforcement because law enforcement is typically being used against them. So to report these hate crimes for them is a big step.
Republican Gomorrah, inside the movement that shattered the party, is a, quote, bestiary of dysfunction, scandal, and sordidness from the dark heart of the forces that now have a leash on the party. It shows how those forces are the ones that establishment Republicans like John McCain have to bow to if they have any hope of running for president. It shows that Sarah Palin was the logical choice of a party in control of theocrats. Inspired by the work of psychologist Erich Fromm, who asserted that the fear of freedom propels anxiety-ridden people into authoritarian settings, Blumenthal explains how a culture of personal crisis has defined the radical right, transforming the nature of the Republican Party for the next generation and setting the stage for the future of American politics.
My book begins with Dwight Eisenhower, who was a Republican president in the early 50s. I guess you would consider him a moderate Republican, warning about the threat of the far right because he and his administration were under attack by, I guess, the early antecedents of the Tea Party, of the far right. They were called the John Birch Society. They had accused his Secretary of State of being a communist agent for the Soviet Union. It's the same language you hear about Barack Obama. Mm-hmm. They even said Dwight Eisenhower's brother was raising money for the Communist Party USA. Just crazy stuff. And he was trying to guard his party against this extreme element because the Republican Party at that time was considered the big tent party. There were lots of black Republicans. For example, one of Eisenhower's biggest supporters was Jackie Robinson, the first black African American to play in Major League Baseball. Because he was, a moderate. Even Richard Nixon was a moderate at this time. And there was a shift in the Republican Party in 1964 under Barry Goldwater, when the Southern Democrats, who had opposed civil rights, moved into the Republican Party when Lyndon Johnson, then the president, passed the Civil Rights Act, allowing blacks to have enfranchisement and voting rights, things like that. Goldwater ended his life with a condemnation of the Christian right and a condemnation of the far right. Even Ronald Reagan, who they uphold as this great hero, would have despised this Islamophobia just because he personally was upset by playing to people's crude instincts and by this kind of demagogy. And there really is no leadership right now in the country that's capable of putting this hatred back in the box. Instead, what you have are a bunch of Republican presidential hopefuls who really have no chance of defeating Obama, competing with one another for who can be the most extreme, because the far right controls the party. Today, Newt Gingrich, who is the former House Majority Leader, he's a great moral leader of our country who's had 3 wives, more wives than Idi Amin, and I think cheated on his second wife with a paid congressional staffer. And then left his second wife while she was recovering from cancer. And so he's going to the church of Pastor John Hagee, who I discuss in my book. He's the foremost leader of Christian Zionism in the United States and believes that the end of the world could come any day, that Islam is the religion of Satan, and that if Jews fail to convert to Christianity during the end times, they will burn in an everlasting lake of fire. Yet he's a great supporter of Israel who's been hailed by Benjamin Netanyahu as a friend of the Jewish people. And now Newt Gingrich is making a pilgrimage to his church. So this just shows how extreme the party's become. It's really gone from the big tent of Dwight Eisenhower to the one-ring circus of Sarah Palin and Newt Gingrich.